Once upon a time, in a small, quiet village surrounded by lush green hills and tall trees, there lived a woman named Fatima. She was known for her beauty and kindness, and she was especially popular as the village's milk seller. Every morning, Fatima would be in her backyard, preparing milk to sell to the villagers. One sunny morning, as Fatima was making milk in her big, beautiful bowl as usual, something unexpected happened. Tanko and some villagers quietly entered her home and walked straight to the backyard without making any noise. They wanted to see how Fatima prepared her famous milk. Just as they stepped into her backyard, they were shocked at what they caught sight of. Their eyes opened wide and they gasped. They couldn't believe what they saw. Fatima was pressing milk from her breast into a big bowl. She did this every day to sell milk to the villagers. One of the villagers shouted, "Fatima, what are you doing?" They all stood there, stunned. The nunu they had loved so much was not cow milk at all. It was, in fact, Fatima's breast milk. Tanko stepped forward and said, "I told you all that Fatima's milk isn't from cows. It's from her own breasts." The villagers were shocked. They didn't know what to say. Some felt very angry, disgusted, and betrayed. They couldn't believe they had been drinking Fatima's breast milk for years. They couldn't understand why Fatima would do such a thing. They all stood there, staring at her, trying to make sense of what they had just seen. The remaining villagers were furious when they learned the truth. "How could you trick us like this?" one shouted. They felt cheated and betrayed. Some of them picked up sticks and stones, ready to punish Fatima. "You lied to us," another yelled. Fatima, scared and shaking, tried to explain. "Please listen to me. I have a reason for what I did," she pleaded, holding up her hands. But the villagers were too angry to listen. They waved their sticks and raised their stones, their faces full of anger and confusion. "Why would you do this?" a woman cried. "We trusted you." Just then, someone threw a stone. It hit Fatima on the head, and she fell to the ground, bleeding. The villagers gasped, realizing what had happened. "Stop this madness," someone shouted. At that moment, the village elders arrived. They saw the chaos and quickly stepped in. "Enough," one elder commanded, raising his hand. The crowd quieted down, still breathing heavily with anger. "Let her speak," another elder said firmly. "We need to hear her side of the story." The villagers reluctantly lowered their weapons, and the elders helped Fatima to her feet. Blood trickled down her face, and she looked at the villagers with sad eyes. The crowd murmured, uncertain and still upset, but they stepped back to give her space. Now it was time for Fatima to explain why she had done what she did. With a heavy heart, Fatima began to tell her story. She looked at the villagers, her voice trembling. "You all know me," she started. "You remember when I was happy with my husband, Dogo, and our 7 children. We were a loving family." The villagers nodded, remembering the old days. Fatima continued her story, recalling the days when life was full of joy and laughter. "Dogo and I were so happy," she said, a faint smile appearing as she remembered. "Our 7 children brought us so much joy, but then everything changed." Her face darkened with sorrow as she recounted the tragic events. "It started with our youngest son, Tariq," she said. "He fell ill, and despite everything we did, he couldn't be saved. He was so small, so full of life. Losing him broke our hearts." The villagers listened, feeling the weight of her grief. "Not long after," Fatima continued, "Dogo went out to the farm. He was always strong and hardworking. But that day, a big tree fell on him. He didn't come home. I was devastated." A hush fell over the crowd as Fatima spoke. The villagers remembered the day Dogo died, a day that shook the entire community. People began to talk, she said, her voice low. They whispered that I was cursed, that I was the cause of all these tragedies. Fatima paused, her eyes welling up with tears. Then, one by one, 4 more of my children died. Each loss was like a piece of my heart being torn away. I was left with only 2 children, struggling to keep going. People avoided us, afraid that whatever was happening would spread to them. The villagers hung their heads, some ashamed of how they had treated her. With no support and no way to earn a living, I was desperate, Fatima said. I felt so alone, abandoned by everyone I knew. The pain in Fatima's voice was clear. Her life had been full of love and happiness, but it had all been stripped away, leaving her isolated and desperate. The villagers began to see the full extent of her suffering, and their anger started to fade, replaced by a somber understanding. Fatima's voice trembled as she continued her tale. After losing so much, I tried to find a way to survive. I thought maybe if I cooked food and sold it in the market, I could make a living. But no one wanted to buy from me. The villagers listened, recalling how they had avoided her stall in the market. People whispered behind my back, Fatima said. They called me a witch. They said that if anyone ate my food, they would be cursed or have bad luck. It hurt so much to hear those words, to see people walk by and avoid me like I was a plague. Desperation set in as Fatima struggled to provide for her remaining children. I tried doing small chores for the few people who still spoke to me, she continued. I cleaned houses, washed clothes, and even cleared weeds, but they wouldn't let me near their kitchens or children. They were scared of me, scared of what they thought I might do. Despite her efforts, Fatima's situation only grew worse. The little money she earned was not enough to feed her family. We were hungry all the time, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. There were days when we had nothing to eat. My children looked up at me with sad, hungry eyes, and I felt so helpless. The villagers shifted uncomfortably, remembering how they had shunned her. Then my last daughter, my sweet little girl, grew weaker and weaker, Fatima whispered. We had so little food, and she was so small. One day, she just couldn't hold on anymore. She died in my arms, hungry and cold. A heavy silence fell over the crowd as Fatima spoke of her daughter's death. The villagers felt the weight of their actions, realizing how they had contributed to her suffering. They had pushed her away, believing the worst about her, and now they saw the consequences of their rejection. Fatima stood before them, a grieving mother who had lost everything. Her story was one of sorrow and desperation, and the villagers began to understand the depth of her pain. They had treated her as an outcast, and now, faced with the truth, they felt a deep sense of remorse. That was how the story of how Fatima started selling her breast milk began. After losing everything, Fatima felt utterly lost. With her children gone and the villagers' rejection still fresh, she had nowhere to turn. One day, in a moment of desperation, she decided to visit the old woman she had met before, hoping for some kind of help. Fatima traveled to the old woman's home, a small, mysterious hut on the edge of a distant village. The old woman welcomed her in, her eyes full of knowing and kindness. What brings you here, my dear? She asked, her voice soft yet powerful. Fatima, with tears in her eyes, told the old woman about her struggles. She spoke of her losses, the villagers' accusations, and how they shunned her. I have nothing left, Fatima said, her voice breaking. I can't keep living like this. I need help. Anything that can save me. The old woman listened carefully. Then she nodded slowly and said, there is something you can do. It might sound strange, but it's a way to survive and even get back at those who wronged you. She leaned in closer and whispered, you can sell your breast milk, but not just any milk. You'll add a special ingredient that will make it irresistible. Fatima looked confused and a bit scared. Sell my breast milk? She asked, unsure. And what is this special ingredient? The old woman smiled gently. Yes, your own milk. As for the ingredient, it's something harmless but magical. It will make your milk taste so good that people won't be able to resist it. They will come to you, desperate for more. It's a way to survive, and maybe in a way to teach them a lesson for treating you so poorly. Fatima hesitated. The idea felt strange and wrong, but she had nothing left to lose. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. What if it makes things worse? The old woman reached out and touched Fatima's hand. It's a harmless thing, she assured her. You're not hurting anyone. It's just milk, but it will give you power. A way to make them see you differently. Sometimes, in desperate times, we must do things we never imagined. With a heavy heart and nowhere else to turn, Fatima agreed. She felt a mix of fear and hope, wondering if this strange plan could really work. The old woman gave her a small, mysterious package, instructing her on how to use it. As Fatima left the old woman's hut, she felt a strange determination. She had nothing to lose and everything to gain. She decided to try this last desperate plan, hoping it might change her fate and give her some control over her life again. Fatima returned to her village with a mix of hope and fear. She prepared the milk as the old woman had instructed, adding the special ingredient to make it taste unique and irresistible. She filled her containers and headed to the market, unsure of what to expect. On the first day, Fatima set up her little stand, feeling nervous. She called her product Nunu, the local word for milk. As villagers passed by, they hesitated at first, remembering the rumors about her. But the rich, inviting aroma of the Nunu caught their attention. One brave villager finally decided to try it, curious about the new product. After taking a sip, his eyes widened in surprise. "This is amazing," he exclaimed. "You have to try this, everyone." He quickly spread the word, and soon more people gathered around, eager to taste the Nunu. Fatima watched in amazement as the villagers lined up, eager to buy her milk. They sipped and smiled, praising the delicious taste. "It's so creamy and sweet," one woman said, licking her lips. "I've never tasted anything like this before," another man added, handing over his money with a satisfied grin. Day after day, the scene repeated itself. More and more villagers came to buy Fatima's Nunu. The once suspicious and wary townspeople now praised her milk. They talked about how good it was and how they couldn't wait to buy more. Even those who had shunned her began to look at her differently, their suspicions forgotten in the face of such deliciousness. Fatima felt a wave of relief and joy. For the first time in a long while, she had something to be proud of. She was earning money and, more importantly, gaining acceptance from the villagers. They no longer whispered behind her back or called her a witch. Instead, they smiled and thanked her for the Nunu, happy to see her in the market each day. With each passing day, Fatima's business grew. She was no longer the outcast, but a respected member of the community, known for her wonderful milk. Her heart swelled with happiness as she counted her earnings, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. Fatima had finally found a way to turn her life around, and it was all thanks to the strange magical milk that everyone loved so much. As Fatima's milk business flourished, she found herself busier than ever. Every day, she prepared more Nunu, and every day, the villagers eagerly bought it all. The once quiet and lonely woman was now surrounded by smiling faces and warm greetings. In her joy and newfound success, Fatima forgot about the old woman who had helped her. She didn't return to thank her as she had promised, caught up in the whirlwind of her booming business. Little did she know that this would lead to the start of a big problem for her, because not everyone in the village was blinded by the delicious taste of her milk. Tanko, a man who lived near Fatima, grew suspicious. He had never seen her go to the herders to buy cow milk. Yet, she always had plenty to sell. Something didn't add up, and Tanko couldn't shake the feeling that there was a secret behind her success. Tanko began to watch Fatima closely. He noticed that she never left her house to buy milk, yet her containers were always full. Where does she get all this milk? He wondered aloud. He tried to warn the villagers, telling them, "There's something strange about Fatima's Nunu. Have any of you ever seen her buy cow milk?" But the villagers, now addicted to the sweet, creamy taste of the Nunu, didn't want to hear it. "You're just jealous," they told Tanko. "Fatima's milk is the best thing that's happened to this village in a long time. Why would we question it?" Tanko grew frustrated. No one listened to him. They were too enchanted by the taste of Fatima's milk to consider that there might be something unusual about it. "I'm telling you, there's something she's not telling us," Tanko insisted. But the villagers laughed him off, dismissing his concerns as baseless jealousy. Fatima, meanwhile, continued with her daily routine, unaware of Tanko's suspicions. She was grateful for the change in her life and the acceptance she was receiving from the villagers. Her heart felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, she felt truly happy. She didn't realize that her oversight in not thanking the old woman and the growing unease of Tanko would soon lead to trouble. As Tanko's doubts simmered beneath the surface, the villagers remained blissfully unaware, enjoying their daily dose of Nunu. The unseen problem was growing, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would come to light. Tanko's suspicions had reached a boiling point. Determined to uncover the truth, he decided to take matters into his own hands. One early morning, before the village was awake, Tanko sneaked into Fatima's backyard. He moved quietly, careful not to make a sound. As he peered through a gap in the fence, Tanko saw something that shocked him. There was Fatima, sitting in her backyard, pressing milk from her breast into a bowl. She was focused on her task, unaware of Tanko's prying eyes. Tanko watched in stunned silence, finally understanding the source of the mysterious Nunu. Unable to believe what he had seen, Tanko quickly left Fatima's house and ran to the village square. He found a group of villagers gathered there, preparing for the day's work. Panting and out of breath, Tanko shouted, "I saw it! I saw Fatima. She's been selling her breast milk, not cow milk." The villagers looked at him with disbelief. "What are you talking about, Tanko?" one of them asked. "That's ridiculous." Tanko shook his head, frustrated. "I'm telling you, I saw it with my own eyes. She was pressing milk from her breast in her backyard. That's the Nunu she's been selling us." But the villagers laughed, not taking him seriously. "You're making this up," another said. "You just want to ruin Fatima's business because you're jealous." Tanko clenched his fist, growing more agitated. "No, I'm telling the truth. Come with me, and I'll show you. You can see for yourselves." Still skeptical, but curious, a few villagers agreed to follow Tanko. They made their way to Fatima's house, with Tanko leading the way. As they approached, Tanko motioned for them to be quiet. They crept around the side of the house and peeked into the backyard. There, just as Tanko had said, was Fatima, pressing milk from her breasts. The villagers gasped in shock, They couldn't believe their eyes. The Nunu they had loved so much was not cow milk at all. It was Fatima's breast milk. The truth was out, and the villagers were stunned. Back in the present, Tanko turned to the villagers, his expression a mix of vindication and concern. "Now do you believe me?" he whispered. The villagers nodded, still processing the revelation. They were angry, confused, and felt betrayed by Fatima's deception. With the truth unveiled, the villagers knew they had to confront Fatima. The scene was set for a confrontation, and the once peaceful village square was about to become a place of turmoil and outrage. When the villagers saw this with their own eyes, they couldn't contain their shock. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. "It's true!" one villager exclaimed, covering their mouth in disbelief. "She's been selling us her own milk all this time." Fatima looked up, startled by the sudden presence of so many people. Her face paled as she realized she had been caught. She stood frozen, unable to speak, as the villagers began to shout and accuse her. "You tricked us," one villager shouted, shaking their fist. "You let us think it was cow milk." Another villager, visibly angry, added, "We trusted you, Fatima. How could you do this to us?" Even the village elders, who had come to see what the commotion was about, were there. They stood with the crowd, their faces stern and disappointed. The king himself, who had often enjoyed Fatima's milk, was among them. His eyes were cold as he looked at her. The villagers continued to voice their anger. "We feel betrayed," someone yelled. "You've been lying to us all along." Fatima, overwhelmed and cornered, tried to speak. "Please, forgive me," she began, her voice trembling. But the villagers were too angry to listen. They felt humiliated and deceived. The secret that had once brought her prosperity was now the cause of her downfall. The elders stepped forward, trying to calm the crowd. One of them raised his hand and spoke with authority. "Enough. We have all been deceived, and we have a right to be angry. But let us handle this matter with dignity and order." The villagers quieted down, but their anger simmered beneath the surface. They turned to the elders and the king, waiting for their judgment. Fatima stood trembling, tears in her eyes, knowing that her fate now rested in the hands of those she had once called neighbors and friends. The revelation had shaken the village to its core. The once beloved milk that had brought so much joy was now tainted with betrayal. The villagers, elders, and king all felt the sting of Fatima's deception, and the air was thick with tension as they awaited the next steps. The revelation of Fatima's secret had unleashed a wave of fury among the villagers. Their initial shock quickly turned into anger, and that anger became violent. Unable to contain their rage, they picked up stones and sticks, advancing towards Fatima. "How could you lie to us?" one shouted, throwing a stone that hit Fatima's shoulder. Another villager joined in, yelling, "We trusted you and you betrayed us." The crowd's anger grew, and they began to stone and beat her, their faces twisted with disgust and betrayal. Fatima cried out in pain and fear. "Please forgive me," she pleaded, trying to shield herself from the blows. "I only did it because you treated me so badly. You all shunned me, called me a witch. I had no other way to survive." But her words fell on deaf ears. The villagers were too consumed by their anger to listen. "We don't care about your excuses," a woman screamed, throwing another stone. "You deceived us all." As the violence continued, the elders and the king tried to intervene. "Stop this madness," one elder shouted, stepping forward. "This is not the way to handle things." But their voices were drowned out by the crowd's fury. Seeing that the situation was getting out of control, a group of men grabbed Fatima and dragged her away from the angry mob. "Take her to the edge of the village," one of them ordered. "She doesn't belong here anymore." Fatima struggled, tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't do this," she begged, her voice breaking with desperation. "I'm sorry. I had no choice." But the villagers were resolute. They dragged her to the outskirts of the village, ignoring her pleas for mercy. Once they reached the edge of the village, they threw her to the ground. "You're banished," one of them declared. "Don't ever come back." Fatima lay there, bruised and broken, her heart heavy with sorrow. She had lost everything: her home, her business, and any hope of redemption. The villagers turned their backs on her, leaving her alone and abandoned. As she lay there watching the villagers walk away, Fatima realized the gravity of her actions. She had deceived the people who were once her neighbors, and now she was paying the price. Banished and disgraced, she was left to face the harsh reality of her choices. Knowing that she could never return to the life she once knew, Fatima, battered and exhausted, struggled to her feet after the villagers left her at the edge of the village. She felt a deep pain, not just from the injuries, but from the betrayal and loss. With nowhere else to go, she decided to seek out the old woman who had once offered her a strange solution. Perhaps there was something more the woman could do to help her now. With each painful step, Fatima made her way into the forest. The trees loomed tall around her, their shadows casting a gloomy atmosphere. She walked slowly, her body aching and her spirit heavy. Finally, after a long and difficult journey, she arrived at the old woman's hut. But as she approached, something felt different. The hut was quiet and empty, its door slightly ajar. Fatima called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" But there was no answer. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, only to find the old woman's daughter sitting quietly, her face marked with sorrow. "Where is she?" Fatima asked, her voice barely a whisper. The daughter looked up, sadness in her eyes. "She passed away," she replied softly. "My mother is gone." Fatima's heart sank. The one person she thought might understand her, who might offer her some comfort or guidance, was gone. She felt utterly alone. The daughter's kind gaze met hers, but there was nothing she could do. The old woman's wisdom and strange magic were lost forever. Without the old woman's guidance, Fatima felt truly lost. She had no home, no family, and no future. She wandered back into the forest, her steps aimless. The trees closed in around her, and soon she disappeared into the depths of the woods, never to be seen again. Back in the village, the people were left with their thoughts and regrets. The once joyous market, where Fatima's Nunu had brought so much happiness, was quiet. The villagers whispered among themselves, wondering if they had been too harsh. They questioned whether the rejection and harsh treatment of Fatima had pushed her to such desperate actions. Some felt guilty, remembering how they had shunned her and called her a witch. Others stood by their anger, feeling justified in their outrage over her deception. But as time passed, many began to wonder, was Fatima truly to blame? Or had they, in their cruelty and suspicion, driven her to make such a desperate choice too? They also pondered what the old woman might have said if she was still alive. Would she have defended Fatima, explaining her actions as those of a desperate woman seeking survival? Or would she have condemned her, acknowledging that the deception, however motivated, was wrong? These questions lingered in the air, unanswered. The villagers were left to reflect on their actions and the consequences of their judgment. The tale of Fatima became a story told and retold, a cautionary tale of compassion, judgment, and the complexity of human actions. And somewhere Deep in the forest, Fatima's fate remained a mystery, a silent testament to a life marred by sorrow and misunderstanding. Now, dear viewers, who do you think was wrong? Was it Fatima or the villagers? And if the old woman was still alive, what do you think she would have said to Fatima? I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.